with some work that I've been doing over the last 15 months with a central government department, but just to kind of roll it back a little bit about my experience of working with town and parish councils, and I'll also kind of give a bit of an update in terms of who I am, which should be this slide. So yeah, I've been working on inclusive and sustainable development for quite a long time, as we've just been talking. Also, that was in Angola and other African and Brazilian contexts, but also particularly in England and the Southwest. And I have been looking at civil society, local government, thinking about monitoring and evaluation, accountability and learning, which is one of the acronyms that Save the Children use, which I think is actually a very nice way of, it's not just measurement, it's also about how do you use that to be accountable to your stakeholders and learn from that experience as well. I have written on localism and the politics of transition and looking at particularly at rural planning issues. Looking at SME nature positive finance is a project I'm involved in, which is how to kind of incorporate biodiversity into how we think about investment. Doing some work on supply chains, supporting parish and town councils on neighbourhood planning and general community initiatives, working with a local authority on supporting the voluntary community, faith and social enterprise sector in the context of devolution. And I have for some time been engaged with NALC and SLCC, and also with Tristram as well, and Parish Online. So I've got lots of experience working with town and parish councils, and there's a link which I will send you when you get my presentation to connect on LinkedIn should you want to. So I want to talk about some research that I did as part of a British Academy Policy Innovation Fellowship, which was working with the Department for Culture, Media and Sport in their Civil Society and Youth team. And it was a 15-month project where I was looking at what is the value of the voluntary community and social enterprise sector. I've also put faith in there because I know some places use faith as well. And I wanted to particularly talk to you today about what that particular study means in the context of thinking about the role of parish and town councils to not only understand and amplify the value of the VCSE sector, but also what it means in terms of how they can think about the value that they generate from a multiple lens of value, essentially, and to kind of test a few things and assumptions with you, and also see if you want to get involved in the next steps, because the British Academy are funding some follow-on work, and it'd be great to have you involved. I've got some questions scattered around my presentation, so it won't just be me talking at you. But essentially, I'm really interested in how, if you measure what's valued, what that then can mean in terms of like the balance of power, supporting entrepreneurial ecosystems. So that's not just private sector, but also how town and parish councils can play a role in being entrepreneurial with the voluntary community and social enterprise sector. And what that means in terms of like policy innovation, particularly in the context of devolution, as well as things like regenerative procurement. So how can your procurement mean that you support things like community wealth building, community action through positive decisions on that? So essentially, the fellowship was looking at how do current valuation methods and metrics shape policy interventions, and how can they leverage local innovation within the VCSE sector. It's work that was funded through the British Academy, as I've said, but also, as well as the British Academy extending some follow-on funding, I'm also a local policy innovation partnership LPIP Place Fellow. So I'm going to be doing some work looking into these issues more on that as well. So I've got some questions for you in a minute, but just to kind of very quickly kind of say about what the relationship is, and you will obviously have very, very clear views on this as well, but thinking about the context of VCSEs and how they help to deliver public services and the contribution that they make to the UK economy. And there's lots and lots of social enterprises and VCSE organisations, but sometimes the way that their contributions are measured doesn't quite fit, the actual wholesale value of what they are delivering. And that's kind of an issue with some of the metrics and lack of awareness or problems with communication or siloed partnerships, etc. So parish and town councils play a real role in supporting these organisations because they are closest to the communities, and they can recognise and amplify this value. But also, and this would be interesting to get your thoughts on, whether it's controversial, whether it's accurate, or a bit in between. But parish and town councillors are also volunteers, as you well know, and you're also a bridge between different community and government initiatives. And sometimes this kind of tension of you are a volunteer, but you're government, and then this kind of feeling of maybe you're not seen as equals to the kind of higher tiers of government can also play into a kind of dynamic of power, where sometimes parish and town councillors might feel undervalued. Not always, but there is this other issue that actually it's not just the VCSE sector that has this kind of challenge of not being seen fully, but also the parish and town council sector. So how can this particular lens support responding to those two different questions? So I just wanted to ask some questions really at this point. Like, what's your relationship like with local voluntary community, faith and social enterprise organisations? Does it differ according to their size, their theme, their governance model, the individuals that are in these organisations? What challenges are they facing in particular in terms of accessing support? Maybe that's time, money, resources. Sorry, quite a lot of questions. You can pick and choose which ones you want to respond to. How much of that is due to the fact that these VCSE organisations struggle to communicate their value? And where has it worked well, where they've actually successfully communicated their value, and how do they do this? And what's the kind of major challenges, and how is the challenges that are being faced by the voluntary community and social enterprise sector the same or different to what you face as town and parish councillors? So you don't feel obliged to answer all those questions, but if there's anything that resonates or you want to come and chip in at this point, it'd be really helpful just to have a conversation. But if nobody wants to say anything, that's also fine. And I can't see anyone.
Oh, good. Sorry, I've jumped the gun. Amy, just one question on if I could quickly, on the value. You said the value of the VCSE sector is however many billion. And then there's another estimate of value which seemed to be different. How is that measured, and what do those mean?
So yeah. That one.
Yes. 78 billion to the UK economy. Is that valuing the services they provide in terms of providing food and lifts and support, or is it in other words, is that the voluntary sector doing something that otherwise the state would have to do?
So yeah, I think it's like the contrary. So I can get you the actual how that was calculated. Yes, there is so I'll have to check. So that might just be an issue of putting two figures.
Because then the 17 billion seems to be on the next line, seems to be measuring the same thing.
Okay, yeah, I'll have to check that. But essentially, it's kind of it's underpinned by various calculations that have been done, as far as I'm aware, by government, and it's kind of like how much they. I guess it's more from the kind of cost benefit. This is the kind of monetary value that they contribute in terms of services that they deliver. So I can look into that specific question. But yes,
thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, that's clarification.
Yeah, I will follow that up. So going to the questions, does anybody want to respond to any of those?
Amy, a number of us got our hands up. Just
okay. Well, do you want to just whoever's got their hand up first? Do you want to mediate that?
I think it's David.
All right. I'll go first. David Morgan-Jones. I'm from a very small parish in North Hampshire. I have to say our understanding of VCSEs is minimal, to say the least. And I think you'll find that there are a lot of very small parishes that are completely unaware of these entities. And if they do exist, they tend to exist at a district council level rather than at a parish council level. I can't say for towns because they're much bigger beasts than some of the parish councils are.
So do you not have like voluntary organisations or kind of community energy groups and like local church groups and things like that?
I'm sure we do. I certainly think we've got a local church groups, and I know that there's a voluntary driver structures and various other little things going on. But because they have little or no relationship with the parish, the running of the parish council, they sort of operate in a parallel universe.
And does that cause any issues in terms of getting things done in the community, or being more efficient, or resourcing, or just bringing things together? Like, in terms, you know, is that a big issue for a small rural community, for instance?
I don't think so. I mean, everybody just gets on with whatever they need to get on with. And our focus is about carrying out our statutory duties. And therein lies another conversation about relationship with district and county councils. But I won't go down that route unless you particularly want me to, because there's a whole series of power issues and problems that are going on there. But in terms of our relationship with other voluntary units, where they want money and where we can contribute to money, they will come to us asking for money to support what they're doing. And I'm sure if we wanted to tap into some of them, that wouldn't be a problem if we had a particular project in mind. But on the whole, we all sort of happily exist in parallel and sometimes untouching universes.
Cool, thank you.
Moving on to David Newman, please.
Right. I've got some questions about governance that we'll leave till later, but I'll come straight on to your questions about what's happening locally. Most people in Blackbird Leys, if you say, what's the parish council, they say, is that part of the church? So for most people, we're unknown. On the other hand, there are lots of small community groups and a couple of 2 or 3 really big organized ones. And at the other end, groups of people who can't quite understand the documentation they need to get a bank account, and so they're not actually set up. I'll give you a few examples. Recently, the Blackbird Leys Adventure Playground came to a parish council meeting because they'd just lost most of their funding from foundations for the after-school club, where children come from school and spend time in the adventure playground till their parents come from work, who couldn't actually afford childminders because the income in this area is very low. We're one of the 20% most deprived areas in England. And yes, we gave them money and worked with them and training to do that. And there are a couple of groups that have been going for years and have their boards and work on that, with services to older people and young people. We don't actually run any services ourselves. It's all done by the city council, and they don't let anyone else do that. And in communicating value, there's lots of communication about how poor people are, but not about how people are doing things to solve it. It's very much an appeal to paternalists, and we get people coming in to do projects with no connection with the local community, and then they do it for 2 years and then they disappear. We've got maybe 3 groups that are successful in communicating what's going here and making people realise that this isn't actually the murder capital of Oxford. At the other extreme, we're an area where reforms communication have had quite a big effect, and there are protests every 2 weeks against outside the hotel where the refugees stand. That's it.
Thank you. No, I think that's really helpful to talk about, like, what's not being measured, which is what we're going to talk about in a second as well. And yeah, this kind of issue of perception, and yeah, the kind of being understood and miscommunication of expectation and things like that. So thank you.
May go on to Gary in Corsham, please.
Yeah, hi. I'm just waiting for my video to kick in. So here in Corsham Town Council, we're very lucky that we have a very close and wide-ranging relationships with a huge number of community groups throughout Corsham. They attend a lot of our events. They come along and they have stalls and stuff. We help them in terms of grants. We actually set up and run a few community groups ourselves at Corsham Town Council. Some of the other activities that we're doing, we've got the Women's Institute. They're knitting 10,000 poppies to put on the church for Remembrance Day. They're actually at 30,000 because of all the help we've been giving them and support. What else we do? We just like I say, we work with them very, very closely. We send volunteers their way as well. If they come to the town council and they're looking for volunteer opportunities, we send people to like the local food bank, or we put them onto other volunteer organisations. So here in Corsham, as a town council, we have a very, very good working relationship with lots of these organisations. We provide them with lots of support, and it works really, really well.
That's great. That's great. And Gary, just that makes my heart really happy to hear about the church, because my grandfather and my grandmother and my uncle are all resting there. So that's really nice.
Well, also, Amy, you might be happy to hear then, also at the local church, we had about 30 rainbows and beaver scouts there last night, filling a massive bug hotel in the shape of the local country house, Corsham Court, that we had built by the local crafting shed for us, another community group. They built this big, massive bug hotel for us, and we had the rainbows and the beavers there last night, 30 of these tiny children, stuffing it full of sticks and twigs and grass and all sorts of stuff.
That's really nice ecological citizenship in the church context. Very nice. That's really great. That's fantastic to hear. You play this like convening, supportive role. And I think, the difference between, the town level and the kind of well, I guess obviously it's like population and the activity as well. But, the opportunities to engage with the VCSE sector are sometimes, because of the size, higher in more urban areas than rural. But it'd be really interesting to kind of come back to that rural urban question as we go through it, because I'm very interested in rural issues. So yeah, thank you.
Amy, I have my contribution to your questions is, first of all, to start with a question, which is, you mentioned something between 131,000 and I think 250,000 odd organizations that fall into this definition. But are you aware of any register of all these organizations that we would know that they exist? Because that leads me to my second point, which is the local parish council, as highlighted by David and by Gary, is often a focal point for the information. But I think it's very likely to be different with every parish council, because it's not a mandatory duty. So we, for instance, in Bembridge in the Isle of Wight, we hold a day every year when we invite all the local voluntary organizations to come and display their wares to the community, so that we even know that they exist. But that is often the first time. And then the parish council itself funds a community chest, if you will, from which money is parceled out to those organizations which ask for help. But it's very small beer in compared to the overall title.
Well,
So
this is
rather than
where
answer your question specifically, I would just say generalize and say it varies hugely from place to place and must depend upon, like everywhere, which individual is in charge and who and what they're pushing for.
Well, I think this also maybe is a question for Tristan as well, because you've got things like NCVO, which is the kind of national voluntary organisation. You've got Social Enterprise UK, you've got the Charity Commission, you've got all these kind of representative bodies which exist within the voluntary community, social enterprise and faith sectors. So, there is a kind of like national registration of such through these bodies. But then, obviously for the kind of grassroots time bound or not formally registered voluntary organizations, that's it's quite a challenge to quantify that. But I know somebody, I don't know if any of you are aware of somebody called Paul White, but he did a mapping exercise of all the voluntary community and social enterprises in Somerset, and also try to assign a value to the kind of contributions that they generate. And he's worked with some kind of mapping software as well. And I'm just wondering whether there's a role for things like Parish Online, particularly with devolution, as a means to kind of try and map out where these organizations exist. And then, I mean, Tristan and I have talked about indicators in Parish Online before, but then maybe like kind of try and quantify the value that they offer to the different things that are being mapped in a community. So Tristan, I don't know if you've got any comments on that.
Yeah, sort of, we're making slightly disappointingly slow progress, but we are working with Paul White. And
you are? Okay, great.
Yes, we are. No, we are. And we're working with him in particular in Devon. So he's got some funding from, I can't remember which districts in Devon, but there's a group of them.
Yeah.
And the idea, so in Parish Online, what we can't do is sort of create the data. So we want to work with somebody who really knows it and understands the sector and can work out what to show. And actually, Graham's been involved, I think, a bit in that work as well with Paul, because the great collaboration would be another very good source of information. So collecting it together is tough, but it's quite hard to know how to map it, because so what they have at the moment is a sort of, I think Paul's idea is to have a point on the map which says here's a voluntary organization, but then you have to say what its area is, and what its telephone number is, and what the manager is, and what sort of services it provides. And it's quite hard to do that and get it right. So that's what Paul's working away at, and we're ready to support him when he's got data for us to put in. So we would love to have a voluntary sector organization sort of map, which would be useful. But I think the other issue is maintaining it. It's quite difficult to get the data one-off, but then getting a system where it can be maintained so that it's always right. And there's nothing worse than having a map which is out of date, and you ring it or you email and there's no answer because the organization has disappeared.
And what's the role of AI in all of that?
Good question. I don't know, but could be powerful. I agree.
I've worked with Paul on this, Amy, and it's an extraordinary amount of data that he's presenting, and it looks beautifully colourful on the map. He's actually doing it in XMap, which is sort of the big brother to Parish Online. And it looks gorgeous, but the issue is exactly what Tristan's listed, which is how do you keep the data up to date? And there's so much of it. Who's going to do the updating and at what cost? But I also wanted just to mention before switching to David, who's also got his hand back up again, is that the village halls, I find, are a major source of information because, of course, they tend to be booked by organizations to run. They have the monthly coffee morning for the people supporting the local minibus, and then there's all the organizations which are, the Lifeboat Institute, and as someone else has mentioned, the Women's Institute and so forth. They all tend to use either the Methodist Church or the village hall for their activities. And so you could find out who's there perhaps by looking at the village hall appointments, but it's just another source of information. And then you've got in the chat system, you've got quite a lot of questions and thoughts and ideas from people, which will be published at the end of the session. And David has got his hand up. That's David in Hart.
Actually, one for you, Tristan, really. I'm picking up Amy's point about the problem with a lot of parish councils, as you clearly alluded, we're all volunteers. A lot of people are not necessarily terribly proactive about going out and hunting information. So if you want information presented to the parish councils, it has to be done in a way in where you're almost force feeding information in a way that's quick and easy to read, but also needs to be democratized so that it's visible to the parish as a whole. So that if something's missing, then they can, people can then say, this isn't here or that isn't here. And so it strikes me that we almost need some sort of dashboard that is broadly structured the same for every parish and town, but the information in the various components is automatically updated to meet the needs of that particular parish. And whilst it's fabulous to have it GI, put it onto a map, actually, in a way, a simple list, so for example, the voluntary elements available for us to be used in the parish as a simple list would be just as powerful as something that is mapped. So it's a question of how do you identify the information, and as Tristan points out, how do you maintain it, and then how do you project it in a way that busy, not necessarily interested councillors and clerks, also sometimes not that interested, can actually gain access to information quickly and easily.
Mm-hmm.
But David, I'd also say that members of the public, it's not just it
absolutely.
Can be an individual who says, where can I get support for such and such?
That's why I said it needs to be democratized and it needs to be visible to the totality of the parish.
Yeah, but our idea for that is quite clear. We would use a public map. So Paul's idea is that when he's got this database, which would be on a map, but you're right, it could equally be.
But I mean, I think we need to almost, that's why I sort of pointed it slightly at you, Tristan, because in a way, what you're starting to evolve within Parish Online, for example, is a hybrid between mapping, which is what your principal software started off as, and simple data presentation. So for example, if we go back to the EPC discussion, I need a map, I also need a list. And so it's about presenting information in different ways through the same GUI interface.
Yeah, I think we can do that. I was going to say first, I'll come back to your second point, but the first point to sort of democratize it, we can put from Parish Online, you can publish a map.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Into a public map, which is accessible by residents, and they can they got access to that. In terms of the data, although we've got a map form, we can also have a list view, so we can produce a list of data just as well, and that could also be put by the council into a public-facing website. So I think that from where I sit, the main problem is to get data which is of high enough quality that it can be published and used reliably.
Just as a sorry, David, I don't mean to butt in, but I'll just finish off. When I was in a previous world, I ran dashboards down to every single. We had over 400 or 500 separate entities, each with their own dashboard. Once you actually give individuals their own dashboards, the quality of the data then becomes much better because they have an invested interest in actually maintaining the data set. Now that's not so necessary with at council and at individual level, but you would certainly get a lot of feedback about the quality of the data that's there that could be self-maintaining. A huge conversation in its own right. So I'll stop now and hand over to David. Sorry, David.
Yes, I just wanted to mention that this isn't necessarily something done centrally or by a parish council. It's often done by community newspapers. Where I live, we used to get Leeds News every month, and now there's a group setting up a website to share news of events and every organisation in the area. It's in testing at the moment. So the journalism sector may be the one that best works on this task.
I think, because I don't actually know what the time is, because I can't see what the time, can somebody tell me what it is?
34.
Okay, I'm going to character. I haven't shown you the value typology yet, so but I think it's all very helpful to kind of think about how we map things and how we communicate things, because that's all part of this conversation about value as well. So I'm just going to run you through this rationale for developing typology. And essentially it's to try and think about what isn't being measured, but it would be really you know, that you can, so social return on investment is a really one methodology you can use to kind of put a kind of price value on the kind of contributions that people might be making or organizations might be making to social value and society. But there are also lots of other frameworks, tools, approaches that can do that. But also it's really important, I think, to kind of think about all the different types of value as well. So maybe not just social value, but there's lots of other types of value. So what this work that I've been working with somebody called Catherine Welder, who came in to help me at the end of my fellowship to kind of think about this VCSE value mapper tool, which we're going to work on further, but is actually trying to capture like the shadow value. And by that it's meant like the things that are not being measured at the moment but are clearly of value to people, and how you actually identify what that value is and how it might be measured and revealed in a way that could actually be used to inform better, well not better, but just, you know, more efficient resource directing resources. So that's what I wanted just to run you through. And some of the things that might not be measured easily, I mean, we've heard a couple of examples already, but, you know, the social connections that reduce loneliness, developing local skills through volunteering, pride of place, I know that's kind of a policy term at the moment, but also like, you know, cohesion and community ownership and the environmental benefits and how they sit with social benefits, and also like, you know, the kind of community wealth building aspect of making sure that money circulates through local value chains, etc. So I wanted just to quickly ask, before I present the typology and then the kind of plans that we have going forward and how you can get involved, what are the kind of main challenges that you face when thinking about valuing community activities and outcomes? So that might be something that you're doing in the community, or, you know, maybe it might be to do with like a planning application, or that you feel isn't being captured, or it might be that you're trying to support a community organisation do something and you want to kind of help them demonstrate the measurement of that, or maybe there are gaps in your capacity or knowledge of awareness of tools, etc., to kind of measure the contribution that the community is having in one way or another, and what do you need or do you need less of? So there's some kind of other questions before I present the typology and the ideas behind it.
David Newman, you're first off the mark.
Right. Your second question comes just 2 weeks after 2/3 of our parish was selected as an area for the Pride in Place programme, and we're just trying to learn about that. And one day, after we had an online conversation with the county council, which is trying to work out how they do local governance in their proposals for devolution, all of this in the shadow of a central government that hasn't thought everything through and comes up with unusual different things at the whim of a minister. So how work changes under devolution is something we're being asked, apart from, and even where there's hints in government approaches specifically under the Pride in Place with local boards, that's incredibly vague. And it's meant to bring all the community organisations into a board to decide a way forward. It was much easier when it was just us, when we didn't have that and we were just steadily working forward on producing a neighbourhood plan, contacting all these people.
Okay. So the governance is getting more complex
and uncertain.
vaguer. Yeah.
No other hands up, Amy, so you're free to proceed.
Okay.
I think.
All right.
Oh, sorry,
I've just put my hand up. I just wanted to say another thing that strikes me is that a lot of the value that goes on in our little community, our parish, is outside the parish council. So there's first of all the church working very much day to day with people who have needs to help supply them, and quite often that's a completely voluntary network of, the vicar will ring somebody up and say, would you mind fetching somebody, or providing some sort of service. So that's not measured at all. But I wonder if it's important that it is measured.
Well, that's what it's kind of like, there's, the way I see it anyway, is like you have the town and parish councillors who are in effect like volunteers themselves, who are, in my view anyway, part of the VCSE sector in a way. And that there seems to be a disconnect between having it as a kind of community valued valuation of the entire, what's going on in the community, because of the way that things are often in silos and stuff. So it'd be a very interesting question to explore whether or not the parish council or town council should play more of an active role in saying, well, this is part of what we're doing as well, because we're all in the same area, and kind of having shared metrics and shared approaches, supporting each other with the measurement of what they're doing. So that's kind of what I'd like to kind of lead into in a minute.
Okay, thank you.
So this looks a bit complicated. I basically came up with this after reading a particular book, but I just thought it was actually, sort of talk about growth, but actually there's also, not everything can grow all the time, and there are these processes of like stability, and what is valued might grow, or what is undervalued may not grow. And so there's a kind of relationship between what's valued, what then grows, and what stabilizes. And all of that will shift over time. And there are many aspects that are even not captured here. I didn't want to make it too complicated, but you could think of like these three elements operating as like a growth system. So you've got like vibrancy, thriving, ambition, opportunity, investment, and it's quite expansive and it's developmental, and it's not all about money. And then you've got like a value system, which is about recognition, it's about your culture, it's about being honored, it's about the expectations you have to deliver certain roles or learned behaviors that you may have from your family or culture, etc. So it's about meaning making and identity as well. And then you've got like a stabilizing system or stability system, which is about resilience, capacity, support, being able to kind of, sustain your current situation. It's kind of like a foundational structure that enables you to kind of be resilient and endure challenges. So, that they interplay in complex ways. And so it was kind of thinking about this, which made me think, well, actually, the way that we look at value has to also be quite multidimensional. As well, and also consider these temporal ebbs and flows, and the fact that some things may stabilize for a bit and sometimes grow, and just that's life, and embrace that kind of complexity a little bit. So I came up with this value typology, which is looking at so based on my interviews and
Amy, can I just pause you for 2 secs? Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's fine.
Could you go back to the diagram? I'm not sure growth is necessarily the right word to use. I just reflect on our own parish. What we'd like to see is a lot of those adjectives: vibrancy, thriving, ambition, achievement, learning, but it's more about self-sustaining or self-sustainment. I would like to see youngsters coming into the parish, staying in the parish, growing with the parish, and so as a population, we become self-sustaining. We can't do that because, unfortunately, due to the prices of properties, it's extremely difficult to do that. But we don't want to see growth per se. Unfortunately, I have a feeling that will be enforced on us, whether we like it or not. And a certain small amount of growth in terms of numbers, population density, because of course, with increasing population comes increasing complexity and increasing problems. And so I'm not sure growth, stability, value potentially are the most appropriate descriptors. I don't know what you would use in lieu, but I think it's not helpful.
Yeah, okay, that's cool. So what about like regenerative as a kind of like instead of growth? Because you talked about it's almost like a new life force or a new,
Yeah, it's about, we are constantly told that in order to improve a country, it needs to constantly grow. But actually, I'm not sure that's actually a particularly valid argument. I think you can grow in terms of things like in technology, but when you've got a certain geographic space, you don't want to increase the population, because what that then has is it increases the amount of housing demand and all the rest of it, which has massive impacts in terms of biodiversity, energy requirements, etc. So there is an argument for just a self-sustaining communities, but that's not necessarily linked with growth.
I think that's why I put tipping points quite low down, because it's kind of like a limits to growth kind of thing, where then things just need to, go into a process of stabilization because they've kind of reached that limit. But I mean that the main reason why I did that was just because I was trying to challenge the understanding of what growth means in a certain context. But
yeah, you're right. Yeah, absolutely. It is about context.
But that's a helpful point to not make it seem like I'm really trying to push the growth agenda when I do actually put this out more publicly. So but yes, thank you. That's cool. And that's also like the developmental phases is also meant to be like a kind of, as you reach a certain level of maturity and you need to move and you need to grow and you need to change, then yeah, that's kind of why it's like on the edge of that as well. But okay, any more questions?
Yes, David,
I was going to say,
has his hand up. Yep.
I was going to say, you can pick terms to use from donut economics. That has already looked through the difference between what you're doing to overcome, meet local needs, but not exceed the environmental limits. And there's a whole load of thinking about that you could put back into what is, in your case, the flow diagram, which isn't the same as the diagram of different issues and how and whether locally you are on the too low or too high or in the nice donut, which is a nice way to live.
Yeah, no, I'm very aware of Kate Raworth's work, but I just kind of was trying to think about these different how value sits into the particular context of like stability and change and stuff. But yes, no, I will have a look at her book again and see if there's any insight that can be used. So in terms of like the value typology, how much time have I got now?
It's up to you, Amy. People tend to hang on past the hour if they wish to.
Is it 10 to, quarter to?
It's about 10 to at the moment.
Okay, all right. Well, I'll just so I just want to whiz through this because so I can share these slides with you another time, but essentially there are possible ways of like looking at different types of valuation. So, you've got your monetary cost benefit analysis, which is used quite a lot by policymakers and programmers. Then there's this idea around being recognized and your reputation and being appreciated. So there's like an appreciative value. So there are summary questions, you know, that you could look at from that value perspective. So, you know, is it going to save me money? Will I be recognized for my work? From a capitals perspective, so is it contributing to social, human, infrastructure, natural, cultural value, which are kind of, you know, sometimes measured in certain capitals. There's also whether it's improving governance and culture, is it supporting more positive business models or democratic? We talked about democratizing data earlier. Community assets and ownership, so thinking about what's, you know, delivered or owned or supported by VCSEs or town and parish council sector, etc. There's also like the value chains, which are really interesting, because we were talking about scale in one context the other day, and we're talking about what's the kind of the right scale. And in a way you could think about, well, you know, how supply chains travel is another way of thinking about scale as well. So thinking about like how different organizations, obviously there's lots of opportunities for voluntary community and social enterprises to get involved in procurement these days. So thinking about the positive benefits in that, whether it's meeting a personal value and your intrinsic motivation to kind of, you know, exist in the world. Also regenerative value, so thinking about how things positively reinforce something else. So, you know, that supply chain decision that you're going to make, is it then going to lead, are you going to buy it from a good company or a bad company kind of thing? So, you know, there are the decisions that we make can amplify other types of value as well. And then also, like, you know, are you supporting policy influence? And that might be at different levels of government. I'm sorry, the value chain perspective, that's a duplicate, so I can get rid of that one. And then just very quickly thinking about the metrics. So I looked at different frameworks and tools and those kind of things, and thinking about across these different value types, what is quite well developed in those areas and what's underdeveloped, and where's like an opportunity to maybe go a little bit beyond in terms of thinking about how we might measure these different elements of value. I haven't got time to look at that with you at the moment, but you can look at it in the slides. And so what Catherine and I were trying to look at, so what I wanted to do was thinking about, well, if there is this potential opportunity to look at value from a different way, a multiple way, you know, how might we do that? What do we need to do? So there are some options, which is kind of think about combining different types of measurement and tools with others, focusing on those missing or underdeveloped indicator areas that I've just on the previous slide, thinking about creating interoperable tools and systems. There's a lot of work kind of going on in this area across people who are developing technological solutions. You know, they talk about APIs which can connect different data sets, etc. And also thinking about, yeah, like how tools can start to think about valuing different types of data, and that can reflect the kind of typology. The typology may not be perfect, but I think it's helpful to think in you know, think about that multiple interactive way. So, you know, what you might want to do is thinking about how individual activities can relate to systemic transformation, or how value flows move within an organization, how things change over time. Also thinking about, you know, that kind of holy grail of what's your impact, and also thinking about how does your value support, you know, through the networks and partnerships that you have, how does that enhance the relationships that you have? So that maybe that's the town and parish council working with, you know, the new unitary authorities, or the VCSE sector, or local businesses, or whatever. So what we are looking to do in a follow-up project is to kind of, we've kind of got so far in terms of our thinking of what a VCSE value mapper could look like. We've looked at a taxonomy, thought about like how the micro actions that you can do that are linked to the different value types could then show that you are making a difference, making a change, and how that can be measured across different indicators. So what we'd like to be able to do is map the kind of relationship between what you do to you know, what gets what the outcomes are, and maybe the impact as well, but then also kind of look at it through this value lens, and try and integrate that into kind of things like place-based mapping, but also like supporting a live way where, if, say, for instance, you had a tool where you could map your value, so that could be your current actions or maybe projects that you want to get involved in, and also that was to reveal the things that aren't getting measured at the moment, and that could then help support you to kind of say, well, actually, we want to do this, we are doing this, we're actually generating this amount of value. And so that's your kind of accounting for your shadow value. But also maybe if there was like if government had, or other funders that were funding VCSEs or other groups, could then have that attached to an expectation. If you are going to get some funding, then you need to fill out this kind of value mapper. And then it could kind of almost be like live information that could be given to the funder so that they can have a better understanding of the kind of the baseline and then the improvement over time. So it's a kind of monitoring and evaluation tool, but it's also helps to identify what the value is across multiple lenses. So essentially, it's whether or not you would like to know more about this and get involved. So Catherine and I are kind of looking for people to test the tool that we have kind of worked on so far, which would help to kind of generate a value report for you, and also help you uncover your shadow value. So the things that aren't necessarily being measured and appreciated, which might be able to help access funding and resources and communicate that to others, maybe, you know, like in your parish newsletter or whatever. And helping you to maximise the value of others. So that might be supporting the VCSEs in your organisation, in your community, etc. I'm just going to skip over that stuff, but there are some examples, some indicators that you might want to consider, or maybe you are considering, but there's obviously loads more. And there's some almost identical to those pictures, but that's me and Catherine. And if you want to get in touch, then please do.
Wow.
That was brilliant, Amy. Thank you very much. I suspect that a lot of people are sort of walking around their heads shaking at the moment, thinking, how do we get our heads around this? I do have a question that may lead on to others, which is how many of the parish councils that you are talking to or have talked to actually even appreciate the idea of putting a monetary value on what they're doing? Because I can see that the whole idea of having the government recognize these shadow values and therefore put some funding to it would be extremely popular if anybody knew how to value their own services. But I'm sure this is a fairly new idea to many parish councils, isn't it?
Yeah, we are kind of at the beginning, really, of this journey and talking to parish and town councils. So it's kind of like a bit of a new. Yes, it's very, very early days. But I think, you know, if you wanted to kind of create more resilient, localized supply chains, etc., and then you could kind of evidence that, or if you could think about how this could be an opportunity to reorientate resources, or even to kind of map the value that you have within your parish and town council from all the, you know, experience that you've had in industry or whatever, that can sometimes be overshadowed. So it's kind of like, it's an opportunity to kind of really lay bare the resources and the assets that individuals, organizations, parish, town councils, you know, and the relationships that you have that may not necessarily, you know, like Tristan mentioned about the organization that's doing certain things, but not necessarily being linked up with a parish and town council. So I think there's a whole load of untapped potential, I think, in terms of articulating, measuring value, and it could, if it kind of works out as planned, you know, to help rethink governance, resourcing, potential, and basically uncovering a lot of stuff that isn't uncovered at the moment.
Well, whenever I'm asked to think of a town or parish council that is in the lead of all these things, the name Frome always comes to mind. And you'll see in the chat that Frome is very carefully offering to be involved with your VCSE working in partnership.
Oh,
so
brilliant. Well, thank you. You know, I did my PhD on Frome, and I wrote a book on, I don't know if you've seen this one. It's all about Frome.
So well,
it's in the
I think it's, and now you've got Corsham pitching in as well.
That's right.
The West Country is clearly way ahead of the.
Well,
so
you know.
the chat will be produced on our knowledge base, but if you wanted to keep track of all these things now, you can indeed save the chat to your own computer. Amy, are you familiar with doing that? in Zoom?
I will just note it down first in case I lose it. But yes, I think I know how to do it if it's allowed.
Okay.
Oh, thank you, everybody. That's great.
I will have a copy, but just if you wanted to make a record now,
Yeah.
because you've got those links there. Good.
Yeah.
And David, you just dropped your hand, David Newman. So did you forget or say you didn't want to raise a point?
I thought as we were running out of time, I'd just type it in, but it sounds to do this properly, you need paid people. And it sounds more on the scale of a neighbourhood board, which, of course, would be part of a government programme to spend £20 million. So that was what occurred to me when it is, or a well-funded research project rather than just at the level of our parish council. If we were doing it unfunded, the most you'd get perhaps is a power map knocked up in an afternoon.
Yeah, I think it's really good to have some sort of guinea pig councils to do this with, because it worries me that these things get rather fragmented. If there are masses of people doing different academic studies, maybe the results never filter down to the real users. So to have those councils as guinea pigs would be great, I think, and also to work with Paul White, who I know he's trying to work out some sort of valuation and measurement stats, but you're obviously working with him, so that's really good.
Yeah, no, I'm very closely linked to Paul. Yeah.
And if you want to use XMAP as a mapping tool that can interface with parish websites, that would also be very useful, I think, which Paul is already doing.
Yeah, well, I can keep that connection with you and Paul going, and yeah, no, that's great. I have yes, that's really, really great to have Gary and Sam involved. That's really wonderful. Thank you.
Great. Well, it's been a really fascinating session because I've learned so much in the way of new terminology and new ideas. So thank you very much. Does anybody else have any more questions for Amy, please? Or they'd like to carry on offline with her?
I need to go.
Yeah, I think most of us need to.
I need a week to digest what you told us. I've no idea what it will be.
Right. It's heavy stuff, Amy, but thank you very much. Much appreciated.
Yeah, and I'm sorry about the kind of the two figures. So the 70. So I've just checked the thing that the 16.8 billion.
16 and 7.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't quite know how that got in there, but it's definitely yes. The other facts are accurate at the point at which I looked at them. But yes, the 16.8. I'll correct that before it goes out.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I normally try and end these meetings by just letting people know what's coming next week. And next week we have creating community sustainability hubs. So should be fascinating stuff. And I look forward to being bowled over with even more information. Amy, thank you so much from everybody. And thank you everybody for joining in and putting all your very useful comments in the chat and all the questions you've been asking. Much appreciated. So I'll look forward to next week and thank you all very much. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.